brave souls, to tales spun from darkness. Tonight, we explore cobwebbed corners of your imagination. Let these stories seep into your bones. The mind's monsters bite deepest. Dim your lights. Let the shadows breathe. If you crave lingering dread, join us beyond the veil on Patreon. Sweet Screams. Story 1. The first thing Clara noticed about the old Harlow house was the smell of wet earth that clung to every room. Even after 3 weeks of airing out the place, it reminded her of opened graves and potato cellars. That dense mineral tang that settled on the tongue. She told herself it was just the house settling after a decade empty. The red Georgia clay beneath the foundation, exhaling through floorboards, a rational explanation for every unnatural thing that had been her mantra. Since the lawyers informed her she inherited her great-aunt S. estate, the grandfather clock in the foyer struck 13 at 3:17 every morning. She measured the anomaly over 4 sleepless nights. Phone camera recording as the brass pendulum froze mid-swing. The 13th toll always came out strangled. A wet gurgle, like something caught in the clock's throat. By the 5th night, she stopped flinching when the extra chime came. Rational explanations. Faulty gears, warped wood from humidity, the peculiar acoustics of a house built in 1886. Then she found the first handprint. It bloomed on the bathroom mirror after a shower. 5 distinct smears, too large to be hers. When she wiped the condensation away, the prints remained etched in the glass like acid burns. That night, the wet earth smell thickened until she tasted soil with every breath. She slept with the lights on and dreamed of roots growing through her eye sockets. It's just stress, she told the empty kitchen next morning, scrubbing coffee grounds from under her nails. The lie curdled when she opened the pantry. All her canned goods had been rearranged into concentric circles. Labels turned inward. At the center sat a mason jar of preserves, dated 1937. The strawberries inside still improbably red. Her name floated among the fruit in black seeds, Clara, each letter perfectly formed. The crawlspace hatch opened itself on the 7th day. She wouldn't have noticed if not for the draft. A cold exhalation creeping across the hardwood, smelling of turned soil and spoiled meat. The hatch yawned open near the baseboards. Darkness pooling thicker than shadows should be. Something glinted deep in the blackness. Clara approached with a flashlight, the beam trembling across spiderwebs and foundation stones. The bones were old, stained the color of tea. A child's skeleton curled around a rusted soup can. Finger bones still hooked through the pull tab. Nestled in the rib cage lay a photograph from her own childhood. 6-year-old Clara blowing out birthday candles. A face she didn't recognize looming over her shoulder in the cake S glow. That S when the whispers started. They came through the walls first, syllables sliding between plaster grains. By midnight, they demigrated to her left ear, lips brushing her lobe as she huddled under blankets. The language burned guttural consonants like stones grinding teeth, vowels that twisted her tongue when she tried to repeat them. She drank 2 fingers of bourbon and Googled carbon monoxide poisoning while scratching at her arms. The scratches left black crescents under her nails, though her skin remained unbroken. On the 8th night, the house showed her its teeth. She woke to something peeling back the bedroom wallpaper in slow, sticky strips. Moonlight through the window illuminated the pattern emerging beneath not plaster, but layers of skin stretched taut across the walls. The flesh pulsed gently, veined with black mold that spelled out words in a cursive rod. Feed us, feed us, feed us. When she pressed trembling fingers to the wall, it dented like a swollen belly. The basement door appeared the next morning, where her linen closet had been, old oak warped by moisture. The door wept beads of amber down its carved surface. Clara touched the substance and jerked back warm as blood, sticky as pine resin. The carvings resolved under her flashlight S-beam. Hundreds of screaming faces flowing into one another. Mouths becoming eyes, becoming mouths. Her great aunt S features surfaced briefly in the grain, lips moving soundlessly. The stairs groaned under her weight, each step sinking deeper than wood should allow. Cold wrapped around her ankles. By the time she reached the bottom, the door above had vanished. Something waited in the endless dark. Her flashlight died with a pop. The smell of burnt hair replacing the earthy decay. Pressure built in her sinuses as the thing approached not footsteps, but the creak of ancient trees bending, the hiss of roots through stone. The whispers coalesced into a single word, spoken through 100 parched throats. Harlow. She ran blind, hands slapping at walls that felt like petrified muscle. The stairs rematerialized, but the door at the top now bore a stained glass window depicting her own face, contorted in a scream. She burst through into a hallway she didn't recognize. Walls papered with yellowed family photos. In every picture, a shadow crouched behind her relatives, a hunched silhouette with too many joints. Its head a mass of branching antlers. The grandfather clock chimed 13. When she turned, the hallway stretched into impossible darkness behind her. The wet earth smell became a flood, filling her nose and mouth. Photos began peeling off the walls, fluttering toward her like moths. She screamed as the images made contact, each print searing memories into her flesh. Aunt Marable in 58, digging in the cellar as something watched from the coal chute Cousin Thomas in 72, vanishing during a game of hide-and-seek. His overalls found stuffed with damp leaves great-grandmother Aliner in 1903, painting strange symbols beneath the floorboards. With her own menstrual blood, Clara stumbled into the kitchen, but the back door opened onto solid brick. The windows showed only night now, though her phone claimed it was 9:14 am. Something scraped against the ceiling, the sound of antlers dragging across plaster. It was in the walls now. She felt it moving through the house's bones. A malignancy older than the pines that surrounded the property. The Harlow house had never been empty. It had been digesting. Generations of her family tending to the hunger beneath the floorboards, feeding it scraps of sanity and the occasional child. The thing in the walls, didn't he hate her? Didn't he feel anything a human might recognize? It simply existed, vast and ravenous. Its true form folded into dimensions the house's angles shouldn't he allow. The bathroom mirror showed her truth when she finally looked. The handprint on the glass had multiplied dozens of them now, overlapping like a many-fingered creature trying to claw through. Behind the fingerprints, her reflection smiled with someone else's teeth. A spiral brand glowed on her sternum, the same symbol carved into the foundation stones. "You've always been here," her reflection said through blackened lips. "We planted you in the family tree long ago, when the walls began to bleed." Clara didn't scream. She followed the whispers to the root cellar, where the dirt floor parted like a lover's mouth. The last thing she felt was cool soil filling her nostrils. The house's heartbeat thrumming through her veins as she sank into forever dark. They found the house empty 3 days later. The real estate agent noted the peculiar smell, like freshly turned earth and burnt hair, and the way all the clocks were stuck at 3:17. The next owner would comment on the beautiful stained glass, the remarkably preserved wallpaper, the sense of history permeating every room, and deep in the walls, something old and hungry would continue its patient waiting. The Harlow house never stays empty for long. Story 2. The stones knew her name before she arrived. Mara felt it in the ache of her knees as she climbed the overgrown path to Blackthorn Hollow, where the ruins of her grandmother's cottage slumped beneath a crown of twisted oaks. The air tasted of wet iron and rotting apples, the scent sharpening as she approached the property line, marked by 3 lichen-crusted standing stones. They leaned at odd angles, like broken teeth. Her grandmother's voice hissed through memory. Never cross the Trinity stones after sundown, not unless Unearthing willing to pay the tithe. She'd been 6 years old when she last visited, dragged away midsummer after her mother found her whispering to something in the root cellar. There deep in arguments, hushed and feverish, between her parents that night. By dawn, they were gone. Her grandmother's warnings trailing them down the mountain like smoke. Now, 20 years later, the lawyer's letter drew her back estate settlement, and heiress obligation in crisp black ink. The locals in the valley below had refused to escort her up the old bridle path. One woman, her hands stained purple from dyeing funeral shrouds, pressed a sprig of rowan into Mara's palm. "Tell the Hollow you mean no harm," she muttered, "even if you were lying." The cottage was worse than she remembered. Rot gnawed at the timber frames, and the thatch roof had collapsed inward, spilling tendrils of straw into the dirt. But the cellar door remained intact, a slab of age-blackened oak, its surface carved with symbols that made Mara's eyes water if she stared too long. She traced a finger over the grooves. The wood pulsed faintly, like a slow heartbeat. Just get the paperwork done, she told herself, voice swallowed by the Hollow's thick silence. The lawyers needed proof of the property's condition. Photographs, measurements, a catalog of decay. Mara unlatched her backpack, pulling out her camera and a rusted tape measure from the rental car's glove box. As she snapped photos of the cottage's corpse, the lens flickered. Glitches. She assumed the cold mountain air chewing through the battery. But when she reviewed the shots, every image showed the same distortion. A humanoid shadow just beyond the frame, its limbs too long, its head cocked at a liquid angle. The wind shifted. A low, wet sound seeped from the cellar. Mara froze. It wasn't the groan of old wood, or the whine of wind through cracks. This was organic. Hungry, she gripped the rowan sprig, its berries oozing sticky red onto her wrist. The sound came again, a slurping, like something lapping at pooled water or blood. Hello. The word left her lips before she could stop it. Silence. Then Marare. It wasn't a voice. Not exactly. It was the scrape of branches against glass, the creak of a rope tightening, the gasp of a grave S, first shovelful of dirt. Her name, unraveled into a noise. She ran, not toward the valley, but deeper into the hollow, her boots crushing through carpets of dead ferns. The trees closed ranks behind her, their trunks knotted with faces that rolled their bark eyes to follow her. Daylight bled away as if the forest had swallowed the sun. When she finally stumbled into a clearing, her breath sawing through her ribs, she found the shrine. It shouldn't have survived. The locals had boasted for generations about burning the old altars, purging the pagan stains from their righteous soil. Yet here it stood, a stone archway choked by briars, its keystone carved with a hollow-eyed figure holding a crescent blade. At its base lay offerings, a rotted wreath of wheat, animal skulls daubed in ochre, and a child S leather shoe, tiny and curled like a dead mouse. Mara S camera buzzed. The screen flickered to life, displaying a photo. She didn't remember taking a black and white image of her grandmother, young and grim-faced, standing before the archway. A bundle swaddled in linen rested in her arms. The caption, scrawled in the corner in faded ink, read, "Harvest Tithe, 1953. The cold bit deeper." Mara remembered the stories now. The fragments her mother had let slip during wine-soft nights. Blackthorn Hollow didn't grow crops. It grew children. Every 7 years, the families would offer their youngest to the archway, ensuring fertile fields and fat livestock. The tithe her grandmother had warned about wasn't a coin or a crop. It was a life, a soul, a muffled scream in the dark. You stopped the tithes. Mara spun. The archway stood empty, but the voice surrounded her whispers from the soil, the trees, the marrow of her bones. No songs for the soil, no blood for the roots. The hunger grew and grew, and grew. Shadows pooled at the base of the shrine. They thickened, coalescing into a shape that dragged itself forward on too many limbs. Its face flickered through a dozen stolen visages, a girl with braids, a boy missing a front tooth, a toddler clutching a wooden horse, all dissolving into the same gaping mouth. Needle-toothed and endless, Mara backpedaled, but the trees had woven their roots into a cage. The thing's breath stank of loam and spoiled milk. "You owe," it hissed. "Your blood owes." The tithe skipped. The tithe denied. "I didn't no liar." It lunged, cold fingers wrapping her throat. "You tasted our gifts. Summer strawberries, autumn wheat, all grown from sacred ground, all bought with screaming meat. Memories erupted, unseen playmates in the cellar. The giggle she chased through the cornfield. The warm hand that had gripped hers during a thunderstorm. They hadn't been imaginary friends. They'd been echoes, leftovers. The creature's mouth unhinged. "Pay," Mara screamed. The rowan sprig in her fist erupted into flame, its smoke reeking of funeral pyres. The thing recoiled, howling. She scrambled free, sprinting blindly through the forest. As the world dissolved into a cacophony of shrieks and snapping branches, she didn't stop until she reached the Trinity stones, their surfaces now weeping black sap. The die-maker's words choked her. "Tell the Hollow you mean no harm." Mara fell to her knees. "I am sorry." The words tore her throat raw. We didn't he understand? We didn't he want to understand? Silence. Then, softly, the creak of a rope. She looked up. They hung from the oaks, dozens of them. Their small bodies swaying in a wind that didn't he touch the grass. Nooses of braided corn husks bit into their necks. Glassy eyes watched her. Grins split their gray faces. Too wide, too many teeth. Too late, the forest sighed. But the tithe must be balanced. Her camera slipped from her fingers. The screen cracked, revealing a final photo. Herself, kneeling at the stones. A shadow S hands tenderly cradling her head. When the hikers found her 3 days later, Mara was sitting in her rental car, engine dead, lips blue with cold. She couldn't tell them about the shrine, or the small graves, or the way the mountain S hunger lived in her now, curled like a stillborn thing beneath her ribs. She couldn't explain why she signed the deed over to the Historical Society. Ensuring the hollow remained untouched, unchanged. But sometimes, when she walks past playgrounds or schools, she feels the old roots stir. The children S laughter sharpens, just for a moment, into something ancient and ravenous. And in her dreams, she climbs the mountain again. The Trinity stones parting like a curtain, her hands full of stolen candy and wildflowers, a offering, apology, a promise. The hollow waits. Tithes always come due. Story 3. The walls breathed. Clara noticed it on her 3rd night in the house. A faint expansion and contraction of the floral wallpaper behind her grandmother's old writing desk. She told herself it was a trick of the moonlight filtering through the blackened oak branches outside. Told herself the bourbon she'd been sipping to numb the grief had softened her perception. Her mother's funeral wreath still hung on the front door. Rosemary and lilacs browning at the edges, filling the foyer with the scent of forgotten gardens. It began with the smells, not the expected mustiness of a coastal Maine estate left vacant for years, but the wet rot of low tide trapped behind baseboards, the metallic tang of blood blooming under freshly split skin. She'd find herself standing in the upstairs hallway, suddenly aware of salt crusting her lips. Though she hadn't been near the cliffs, the grandfather clock in the parlor started keeping its own time, its pendulum swinging to the rhythm of lapping waves rather than seconds. "You'll want to air out the east wing, mister." Harlow from the village market said when she went for supplies. His cataract-clouded eye lingered on the purple hollows beneath hers. Damp settles different in houses that remember things. The first photograph appeared on the mantelpiece the morning after the storm. Clara stared at the silver-framed image of her great-grandmother Eleanor standing knee-deep in the cove, her Victorian morning dress floating around her like oil on water. The glass was beaded with condensation, though the hearth beneath sat cold. Clara's own face stared back from the tarnished mirror above the fireplace pail. Yes, but still solid, still human. She threw the photograph into the kindling box. By dusk, it had returned to its place, the frame now streaked with briny fingerprints not her own that night. The whispers began, not voices precisely, but the sound a conch shell makes when pressed to an ear distant roaring, threaded through with high, keening notes that raised the fine hairs on her arms. Clara followed the sound through the labyrinthine halls to the cellar door. The wrought iron latch was rusted shut, crusted with what looked like tiny barnacles as she pressed her palm against the warped wood. Something moist and yielding pushed back from the other side. She didn't he sleep. By week's end, the house had grown teeth. Clara sliced her thumb open on a cupboard hinge that hadn't he been there before, jagged metal protruding like a shark's tooth. Blood dripped onto the checkerboard kitchen tiles, each drop hissing as it struck the grout. When she blinked, the patterns between the tiles resolved into angular symbols that hurt to look at directly. The wound festered overnight, greenish pus pooling under the bandage. Doctor. Vickery in town clucked his tongue over it. Saltwater infection, he pronounced, though his gaze kept darting to the amethyst brooch at her collar, her mother's brooch, found clutched in the dead woman's hand after she drowned herself in the bathtub. The tides changed. Clara woke each morning to find the cove's black waters lapping higher against the cliffside, though the almanac showed no new moon. Jagged stones crusted with bioluminescent algae began appearing on her pillow. She hurled them into the roaring fireplace, only to find them nestled in coat pockets or soup bowls hours later, glowing faintly as if with remembered heat. The grandfather clock's face clouded over with algae, its hands permanently fixed at 3:17, the exact time the coroner had estimated her mother's death. She found the journals in the attic. On the first day, the fog refused to lift. Her mother's precise handwriting devolved over the pages into jagged spirals that mirrored the symbols between the kitchen tiles. The choir is singing again. An entry from last October read, "They press their mouths to the foundation stones. I can feel the vibrations in my molars." Later, in frantic pencil strokes, "It wants a throat to sing through. It always wants a throat." The walls bled at twilight. Thick, briny liquid seeped from behind the wallpaper in the upstairs hall. Clara followed the trickle to her Mother S. bedroom, where the Persian rug had dissolved into a mound of seaweed and crab shells. The full-length mirror showed her reflection blurred, as though viewed through fathoms of water. When she leaned closer, something pressed against the glass from the other side, a pale shape, with too many joints in its fingers. The bedroom door slammed shut behind her. The lock clicked. Though there had never been a key, she stopped eating, stopped drinking anything but the bitter tea steeped from lichen. She scraped off the north-facing stones. Her dreams were not dreams, but visitations, cold pressure on her chest. The sense of innumerable eyes studying her from the dark corners of the room. She wake with sand in her sheets, and the taste of kelp on her tongue. Her Mother S. brooch burning against her collarbone, like dry ice the villagers' eyes, followed her when she staggered into town for tinned goods. Old Mrs. Peabody crossed herself with gnarled fingers as Clara passed the post office. At the docks, fishermen muttered about the tithe, while mending nets crusted with the same bioluminescent algae that grew in her house when Clara demanded answers from Dr. Vickery. He pressed a vial of laudanum into her shaking hand. The hall women always had particular sensitivities, he said, not meeting her gaze. Your grandmother used to walk into the sea every harvest moon, had to tie her to the bedposts till the madness passed. The cellar door creaked open on the night. The cove swallowed the cliffs. Clara stood at the threshold, hurricane lamp, casting wild shadows over stone steps that descended far deeper than the House S foundation should allow. The walls glistened with mucus-strung algae. Halfway down, the steps became tidal pools teeming with blind crabs that scuttled from the light. At the bottom, a cavern, not natural, but grown, its vaulted ceiling ribbed like the inside of a colossal throat. Stalactites dripped in time with the grandfather clock S absent ticks. Clara S lamp light caught on shapes embedded in the walls, smooth curves of vertebrae, the hollowed sockets of a skull, the delicate arches of pelvic bones, all human, all hall women. If the tattered scraps of period dresses clinging to some remains were any indication, her Mother S pearl-handled hairbrush protruded from a calcified lump near the cavern. S. Hartha choir began singing as she touched the hairbrush, not voices, but the shriek of tectonic plates grinding, the moan of abyssal currents through deep trenches, the pop of eardrums under crushing pressure. It vibrated in her teeth, in the marrow of her bones. The lamp shattered. In the sudden dark, bioluminescence bloomed swirling patterns that told stories of drowned cities and the things that worship in their ruins. Something moved through the glowing currents, something that had never known air or light, or the frail boundaries of skin Clara. S back struck stone as she scrambled backward. The thing, the choir, the presence poured into her through every orifice, cold and ancient and ravenous. She felt it tasting her grief, her generational guilt, the tender meat of her memories, when it found her mother's death, the bloated flesh, the bathtub brine, the brooch clutched in stiff fingers. It hummed with recognition. She woke on the cellar floor. Dawn filtered through the open door above. Ordinary light falling on ordinary stone steps. No bones, no cavern, but her clothes reeked of low tide. And when she vomited into the kitchen sink, her bile swirled with iridescent plankton. The house welcomed her back. Wallpaper patterns resolved into title charts. Furniture legs fused with the floorboards, transformed into gnarled driftwood. Salt crystals bloomed across every mirror. Clara stopped fighting when the taps ran with salt water. When her mother's portrait over the staircase began dripping onto the foyer tiles below. She wore the brooch constantly now, its amethyst throbbing in time with the grandfather clock's absent heartbeat tonight. The cove licks at her bedroom window. Clara sits at her vanity, brushing her hair with the pearl-handled brush that definitely, absolutely, was not in the house yesterday. The thing inside her chest, the choir, the tithe, the endless blue hunger sings lullabies in a language that erodes sanity. Through the warped glass, she watches pale shapes writhe beneath the moonlit waves. They've been waiting, her new choir, waiting for the last hall woman to take her rightful place in the mirror. Her reflection smiles with too many teeth. The brooch digs into her throat, but when she reaches to adjust it, her fingers pass through flesh as insubstantial as sea foam. Somewhere below, the cellar door creaks open. The house exhales soon. The villagers will whisper about the strange lights in the cove. They cross themselves when they pass the abandoned hall estate, now crumbling into the hungry sea. They pray the tithe has been paid for another generation, but deep in the foundation stones, under the weight of centuries-old sins, something throatless and eternal stirs. It dreams of chorales sung through human vocal cords. It remembers the taste of desperate women's tears, and in the silent spaces between waves, if you press your ear to the cliffs, you can hear it practicing. Story 4. The cicadas fell silent first. Mara noticed it while hanging Illy's dinosaur pajamas on the clothesline behind the farmhouse. The sudden absence of their rasping chorus, making the Appalachian heat feel thicker. Wrong, like the air itself had stopped breathing. She paused, clothespin hovering between her fingers. The woods surrounding her property stood unnaturally still. No rustle of leaves, no chatter of squirrels, even the flies that usually swarmed the compost bin had vanished. Probably a storm coming, she muttered. But the cloudless indigo sky stretched empty overhead. That night, Illy woke screaming, not the usual nightmare whimpers her 6-year-old wrestled with since the divorce, but a shrill, guttural sound that sent Mara sprinting down the hall. She found him pressed into the corner of his race car bed, eyes wide and unblinking as he stared at the closet door. "The man is here," he whispered, voice frayed. Mara's scalp prickled. She flicked on the Spider-Man lamp, casting red and blue shadows across POC lawn posters. The closet stood slightly ajar, revealing nothing but a tangle of overalls and the faint gleam of a forgotten light bright. "There's no one here, baby." She gathered his trembling body close, inhaling the sour tang of fear sweat beneath his strawberry shampoo. Just shadows, but Illy kept staring at the closet long after she sang him back to sleep. The cracks appeared 3 days later. Mara discovered the first one while scrubbing oatmeal from the kitchen floor. A hairline fissure snaking across the linoleum near the back door. It glistened faintly, not quite dry, though she hadn't spilled anything there. By sundown, a dozen more veins split the walls, oozing a thin black resin that smelled of burnt hair and wet stones. When she touched it, the substance clung to her fingers like cold static, humming faintly against her skin. Old pipes, she told Illy as they ate macaroni by candlelight, the power having blinked out an hour before. "We call Mr. Dawson in the morning, but the handyman never came." Illy started drawing again. Mara found the first sketch tucked under his pillow. A stick figure, with too many joints, standing in a forest of spiraling trees. Its head, a scribbled void. More appeared daily. The man by the creek. The man watching from the garden. The man reaching through his bedroom window with fingers like twisted roots. "He doesn't have a face," Illy explained matter-of-factly over chicken nuggets, "but he smiles with his neck." That night, Mara saw the stains. She'd gone to check the breaker box. Flashlight beam cutting through the sticky August dark. The beam caught something wet and iridescent, smeared across the basement door, a handprint twice the size of her own. Fingers elongated, the palms split by a deep gash where a thumb should be. The substance shimmered like oil on water, shifting colors when she looked away. The woods began moving, not the trees themselves, but their shadows. Mara would glance out the kitchen window while washing dishes and catch the silhouette of a hunched figure between the oaks, only to blink and find it gone. The third time it happened, the shadow stood directly beneath Illy's treehouse, its head tilted at an impossible angle. When she grabbed the shotgun from the hall closet and charged outside. She found the grass, beneath the ladder bleached bone white, in a perfect circle. Ellie stopped eating. He'd push his goldfish crackers around the plate, nibbling occasionally as his gaze drifted to whatever empty space the man currently occupied. Dark hollows bloomed under his eyes. His fingernails turned black and brittle. "He teaching me the song," Ellie whispered when Mara tried to take his temperature. His breath smelled like turned earth, the one the stars sing when they fall. The radio died on September 1st. Mara discovered it, crackling static in the pre-dawn gloom. Every station devoured by white noise. Through the hiss, she almost recognized a rhythm, the labored drag of something breathing. The wet click of a tongue probing rotten teeth. She yanked the plug from the wall. The walls wept that afternoon. Black liquid seeped through every crack, pooling on warped floorboards. Despite the relentless drought, it gathered in corners and along baseboards, defying gravity to creep upward in viscous tendrils. By twilight, the entire house reeked of gangrene and spoiled milk. Illy giggled as he dipped his toast in the sludge, declaring it tasted like birthday cake and lightning. Mara stopped sleeping. She paced the perimeter with her grandfather, S. Winchester. Watching the tree line, the shadows grew denser each night, coagulating into shapes that slithered just beyond the property. Sometimes they piled up against the windows like black snow, smudging the glass with patterns that squirmed when viewed peripherally. Once she glimpsed a face pressed against the back door's frosted pane, elongated jaw unhinged, hollow eyes leaking smoke. Ellie began sleepwalking. Mara found him standing barefoot in the moonlit yard at 3:17 am. Small hands raised, as if conducting an invisible orchestra. The surrounding trees arched toward him like worshippers. Branches fused into a lattice that blotted out the stars. When she carried him inside, his skin burned with fever, and his pupils had swallowed the irises whole. "He needs a doctor." She sobbed into her dead phone, nails digging crescents into her palms. The cracks answered. A wet, resonant chuckle vibrated through the walls, shaking dust from the rafters. The ooze on the floors began pulsing in unison thump-thump, matching the frantic rhythm of Mara's heart. The last sunrise came sulfur yellow, the sky the color of a healing bruise. Mara packed Illy into the pickup with shaking hands, ignoring his listless protests. The engine coughed to life on the third try. They didn't reach the highway. The familiar dirt road stretched endlessly through the woods, pines crowding closer with each mile. The dashboard clock spun wildly as the temperature gauge needle dipped into the red. A low drone filled the cab, vibrating their teeth, the same alien chord. Illy hummed in his sleep. When the truck finally stalled, Mara found the farmhouse waiting exactly where they'd left it. No cracks, no ooze, every window dark. Illy smiled for the first time in weeks. He fixed it, the boy whispered, eyes reflecting twin voids. He fixed everything. The thing wearing Illy's skin doesn't he cry anymore. Mara knows this as she rocks him in the squeaky porch glider. Watching shadows congeal beneath the bleeding sunset, his body feels lighter than it should, hollowed out and stuffed with static. The woods whisper constantly, now not in words, but in sensations that squirm behind her eyes. The ache of roots splitting stone, the metallic tang of dying galaxies, the sweet rot of something gestating deep below. She stopped trying to leave after the third attempt. Now she spends hours staring at the new mural blossoming across Illy's bedroom wall. A vast, spiraling design drawn in charcoal and clotting blood. It hurts to look at directly. The angles twist wrong, suggesting depths that shouldn't exist. Sometimes the lines squirm when she blinks. Tonight, Illy finally teaches her the song. His voice comes out, layered a child-s rasp over something jagged and ancient. The melody fractures her thoughts, rearranging memories into sharp new shapes. She understands now why the shadows bow when he passes, why the ooze parts for his bare feet, why the thing in the walls croons when he presses his ear to the cracks. Mara joins the chorus on the third verse. Her throat bleeds black as the notes tear free, but the pain feels distant now, unimportant. Outside, the trees shudder and split, bark sloughing away to reveal glistening cartilage beneath. The ground softens, pulsing like a vast lung. Somewhere in the trembling dark, a door opens, not the farmhouse-s battered oak one, but something older, hungrier. Its hinges screaming in a tongue that predates bone. Illy takes her hand. His fingers feel like twigs, wrapped in cold parchment. Together, they walk toward the waiting trees, toward the wrongness humming beneath the soil. Mara doesn't look back at the house. She knows what she'd see every window filled with shifting silhouettes. Countless hollow eyes watching their progress. The shadows taste like forgiveness. Deep below, the earth begins to sing. Story 5. The salt-stained windows of the Harbinger light rattled in their frames as Clara Price dragged the last crate of provisions across the warped floorboards. 3 months alone on this jagged fist of rock punching up from the Atlantic. The Coast Guard had told her 3 months of maintaining the beacon while the old keeper recovered from hip surgery. The isolation bonus would finally let her pay off the medical debt from her mother's final weeks. She traced the watercolor postcard taped above the generator. Controls her younger sister S rendering of their childhood home in Vermont. All goldenrod fields and sugar maples, a world away from this slate-gray tower, where the CS breath seeped through every crack. The first week passed in the rhythm of routine, polishing the Fresnel lens at dawn, logging weather readings, rewinding the antique clockwork mechanism that turned the light. Nights brought strange acoustics whispers in the salt-crusted ventilation shafts. Footsteps pacing the empty gallery below her bedroom. She blamed the wind. Always the wind on the 11th night. The storm hit. Clara woke to the shriek of failing metal as the radio mast tore free and cartwheeled into the abyss. The backup generator coughed once died and plunged the tower into a blackness so complete she tasted it, a copper penny tang, flooding her mouth. She groped for the hurricane lamp, hands shaking. The match head snapped off. Second match. A sulfur bloom revealing the maintenance log splayed open on her desk. Entries in someone else's hand now. Jagged script spiraling into nonsense. August 14. They re-singing again. Can T tell if it s the pipes? Or August 17. Found more in the west cellar. Teeth, I think. Sealed the August 23. It comes up through the sump when the tide, the flame, kissed her thumb. Darkness swallowed the words by the third day of the storm's siege. The boundaries between tower and tempest dissolved. Freezing spray forced through boarded windows, left corridors glistening with brined mildew. The barometer needle twitched like a spastic finger. Clara caught herself humming along to the discordant moan of the disabled foghorn. Its voice now warped into something between a dirge and a lullaby. She found the first photograph lodged behind the cistern sepia-toned. Circa 1920s, showing 6 lighthouse keepers posed stiffly on the helipad, each man's face meticulously excised with what looked like nail scissors. Underneath, in faded pencil, they wouldn't let us leave. The crawling began that night. Not rats. Something with weight. Something that paused outside her barricaded door to breathe in wet, gurgling inhalations. Clara pressed her cheek to the cold floor, watched shadows ripple through the half-inch gap beneath the door, not cast by anything the emergency lantern could reach morning. Brought a lull in the gales. She armed herself with the fire axe and descended through the tower's vertebrae kitchen. Fuel storage, machine shop, each level colder than the last. The sump pump closet exuded a stench of rancid kelp and iodine. Inside, the concrete floor glistened with fresh scratches radiating from the floor drain. Something pale protruded from the grating. Clara crouched. A human finger severed cleanly, skin bleached to the color of drowned flesh. Rigor mortis had frozen it in a pointing gesture toward the spiral stairs leading up. Her own left pinky twitched in sympathetic pain. The radio remained dead. Cell service had never reached this far out. Her nightly ritual of winding the lighthouse mechanism became an act of desperation, each rotation of the crank sending dull vibrations through the corroded gears. The light itself changed, where before it had swept the waves in clean white intervals. Now it pulsed erratically, staining the storm in migraine hues. Through the telescope, Clara watched fishing boats alter course toward the jagged rocks below. None answered her Morse code warnings. Hallucinations set in with the hunger. Canned goods spoiled overnight. Bloated tins oozing black fluid that spelled words in pooling letters. Stay and listen and swim. The final crate of bottled water reeked of low tide. She drank anyway, gagging on the aftertaste of decomposing shellfish. Sleep deprivation sanded her nerves raw. Every splash became a footfall, every moaning beam a voice. The tower itself seemed to contract around her stairs, multiplying. Rooms rearranging in the dark. She took to carrying a ball of twine to map her path, only to find the strands snapped and chewed through. The Storm SI arrived on day 17. Sunlight speared through fractured clouds. As Clara emerged onto the observation deck, 3 weeks had carved her reflection into something feral, salt-bleached hair, standing in clumps. Eyes like oil spills. Below, the rocks bristled with wreckage. A pleasure yacht S shattered hull. A Coast Guard cutter S rusting bow. No bodies, just miles of kelp-thick waves, and the glint of something moving beneath the surface. Not fish, larger. Patient that S when she noticed the stones, smooth beach pebbles arranged in concentric circles around the tower S base, not washed up, placed, each marked with crude symbols that made her teeth ache to examine. From this height, the pattern resolved into a spiraling vortex that seemed to pull at her vision. The same symbol she found carved into the generator housing, the same shape as the floor drain S, scratches the dread light woke her that night. A sickly green radiance pulsing through the tower. Clara followed it downward, axe handle slick in her palms, past the sump closet dripping, past the crew quarters, mattresses slit open, spilling moldering wool, into the west cellar, where the previous keeper had bricked over an entire wall. Fresh mortar crumbled at her touch. Behind the wall, photographs, dozens taped in overlapping layers. 1930s to present day. All keepers, all missing their left pinky finger. In the center, A recent Polaroid showed Clara herself asleep at her desk. The watercolor postcard conspicuously absent from the wall behind her. Someone had painted a new addition to the seen dark shapes rippling beneath her childhood. Home, S. Golden, Fields the tower groaned. She turned as the sump closet door burst open in a geyser of putrid water. The thing that crawled forth wore the Storm-S voice, a wet, clicking cacophony that bypassed her ears to vibrate directly in her jawbone. It moved wrong, parts sliding against each other like stones in a tide pool. Clara's axe struck something that felt neither flesh nor metal. The creature's laughter smelled of opened graves. Retreat became rout. She fled upward as the tower warped around her staircases, inverting. Walls bleeding black algae that grabbed at her ankles. The creature kept pace below, harmonizing with the lighthouse mechanism's dying shrieks. Clara reached the lantern room as the beacon flared crimson, casting the ocean in bloodlight. Out in the bay, shapes breached. Not seals, not sharks, things that rode the waves toward the tower, drawn to the light's corrupted signal. Clara understood now the missing keepers, the altered courses, the stones. The lighthouse wasn't a warning. It was a lure. The axe's final swing shattered the Fresnel lens. Glass shards became a glittering storm, slicing her palms as she clawed the manual override to kill the beacon. Darkness fell like a guillotine. Silence. Then the wet click of something ascending the stairs. Clara pressed her bleeding hand to the cold glass. Outside, the waves churned with bioluminescent wakes hundreds, converging on her darkened tower. The thing in the stairs crooned her name in a voice made from memories. Her mother's death rattle, her sister's childhood laughter, the exact pitch of her own scream when she found the cancer diagnosis. She is still there. You can see her most nights if your ship strays too near the rocks. A pale figure in the broken lantern room, relighting a flame that burns colder than the void between stars. The new keepers, always temporary, always desperate, report strange sounds in the sump pipes. They show you photographs of pebbles arranged in offering patterns below the tower. Sometimes, when the fog rolls in, you hear the dissonant chord of a foghorn that was dismantled decades ago, and if you be foolish enough to answer its call, you notice the caretaker's left hand remains perpetually gloved. You wonder why the distress signals she flashes mirror no known maritime code. You try not to think about what those patterns might be inviting up from the deep. The harbinger light still stands. The rocks below stay hungry, and out in the black water, something old and patient continues to rewrite its song, note by terrible note, in the key of human despair. Story 6. The soil of Blackroot Hollow remembered. It drank the blood of the first settlers when their plows bit too deep into the wooded hills, absorbed the tears of children who vanished during the harvest moon, and bloomed unnaturally lush each spring, where the old standing stone watched from the northern ridge. The townsfolk called it fertilizer. My mother called it an apology. I smelled the rot before I saw the house, 3 weeks since the accident, and the police still hadn't explained why my mother drove her Buick through the barricades on Miller S. Bridge, why she clawed her way out of the submerged wreck, only to wander drenched and bleeding into the woods. The official report said dementia-related incident. The stack of unopened envelopes from Blackroot S. Historical Society in her kitchen, each stamped with their oak and thorn seal, suggested otherwise. Clara Voss, Mrs. Hargrove S. voice rasped like corn husks as she materialized from the overgrown hedge. Her gnarled fingers clutched a basket of wilted yarrow. Should we stayed east of the river, girl, your mama S. troubles ain't yours to carry. The air thickened. Cicadas fell silent mid-chorus behind Mrs. Hargrove S. left pupil. A thread of crimson swam through the milky cataract like a minnow in poisoned water. She left me the house, I said, brandishing the key like a crucifix. I am here to settle her affairs. Her laughter smelled of turned earth and copper. Affairs. That us rich. You'll be wanting the attic then, where she kept the unpleasantness. The yarrow trembled as she thrust the basket at me. Burn these by the hearth after sunset, and dawn tea you mind the scratching. The house exhaled decay when I turned the key. Photographs lay face down in every room. The grandfather clock, S. pendulum, hung motionless, its brass weights crusted with a lichen that pulsed faintly in the gloom. Upstairs, the attic hatch swung open with a groan, releasing a cascade of bone fragments dear. Maybe, though the curved sliver that pierced my palm fit a human mandible mama S. journal waited beneath a shroud of spiderwebs, its pages stiff with pressed wildflowers that bled indigo stains. Entries devolved from grocery lists to frantic scribbles. April 17th. Found another lamb carcass by the spring. No tracks, no blood, just the crown of hawthorn branches around its neck. May 3rd, they rewatching from the tree line. Can T tell Harold? He'll say it S the dementia again. May 17th, the thorned one wakes. 50 years come the solstice. The LL want another vessel. The final page held a charcoal rubbing of a stone tablet, a twisted figure with antlers merging into tree roots, surrounded by names. Elias Voss, 1872. Margaret Voss, 1923. My fingers traced the fresh engraving at the bottom. Miriam Voss, 2023 bile rose in my throat. The dates marched in 50-year intervals. My great-great-grandfather disappeared during a blizzard. Great-aunt Margaret walked into the quarry on her 50th birthday. Mama S. car crash occurred precisely 5 decades later. To the day dusk, painted the woods in bruised tones. When I reached the standing stone, names swarmed its surface now that I knew how to look generations of Vosses. Etched beneath the thorned one's snarling visage, fresh offerings lay at its base. My mother's pearl earring, my childhood locket, a photo of us at Kenai Island with our faces scratched out. Should V burned the arrow. Mrs. Hargrove S. hunting rifle pressed between my shoulder blades. The townsfolk emerged silently from the trees. Faces obscured by woven hawthorn masks. Their lanterns cast no light, only drank it. Miriam tried to break the cycle, Mrs. Hargrove crooned. Sent you away. Refused to teach you the rights. But the land hungers, Clara. A Voss must feed the roots every 50 years. Or the thorned one takes the whole town. They marched me to the hollow, where Mama S. car had plunged into the creek. The water flowed uphill here, defying gravity to pool around an ancient oak. Its trunk pulsed like a throat swallowing. Roots coiled around skeletal remains, wearing rotted Voss family heirlooms. The tree can't bloom without a soul, Mrs. Hargrove said, as they bound me to the oak with braided nettles. Your Mama's time came, but she fought, made it messy. She gestured to the roots, cradling a familiar shape, wrapped in kelp and blackened honeysuckle. Mama's empty eyes stared through me. Her mouth stretched around a scream, and a tangle of flowering vines the townsfolk began to chant. Bark split beneath me, exuding sap that burned like acid. Roots slithered into my nostrils, my ears, burrowing toward the warm, wet places where memories festered. I tasted Mama's fear as she submerged in the creek, felt the thorned one's ancient consciousness unfurling through the root system, not a spirit, but the land itself, starving and vengeful. Wait, I gagged on invading tendrils. You need me willing, Don T.U., to make the pact complete. The roots stilled. Mrs. Hargrove's mask tilted. What were you playing at, girl? Mama told me stories. Blood trickled from my tear ducts as I pushed the words through. The Voss docentee just feed the tree. We become it. Right. The journal's final page flickered in my mind the thorned one's form. Part human, part oak, part stag. You didn't just kill us. You made us into this thing, S-keepers. Silence. Then laughter from the earth itself, vibrating up through my bones. Clever child, Mrs. Hargrove murmured. The rifle lowered. A willing vessel lasts longer. Your mama, well, she lasted 11 minutes before the roots snapped her spine. Screamed the whole time. I nodded, swallowing the roots creeping down my throat. Let me do it properly. Give me the words. The chant resumed, darker now. They cut me down and led me to the stone. I pressed my palm against the thorned 1S etched mouth, reciting the old country words Mama whispered during thunderstorms. Power surged not through me, but from the 10 generations of Vosses in my blood. The ground rippled. Masked figures stumbled as roots erupted, impaling 3 townsfolk before they could scream. You forget, I hissed, the oak-s voice layered under mine. We Dante serve the land. We are the land. Mrs. Hargrove's mask cracked as I seized her with root tendrils, and we were still hungry. They tell me Blackroot Hollow is prospering again. The new highway crew found the abandoned town last month. Every building intact, but overgrown with vicious blackberry brambles. Strange, they said, how the oldest oak in the state grew up through the church's foundation. Its branches heavy with hawthorn blooms. Even in December the workers dawn tea linger after dark. They swear the tree watches them, that its roots form shapes like faces pressed against cellar windows. Some quit after finding their lunchboxes filled with rotting yarrow. A few whisper of a woman in the woods, her skin dappled with bark. Antlers tangled in flowering vine's eye leave them gifts, sometimes old photographs, rusted keys, the occasional pearl earring. The land must eat, after all, but a Voss keeps her promises. 50 years is such a fleeting thing. Story 7. The walls began breathing on a Tuesday afternoon. Clara noticed it first as a quiver in the peeling floral wallpaper near the baseboard. A subtle expansion and contraction that matched the rhythm of her own shallow breaths. She pressed trembling fingers against the wall, feeling the faint pulse beneath decades-old paste and paper. When she pulled her hand away, 5 moist fingerprints remained on the chrysanthemum pattern, slowly evaporating like breath on a mirror the old Victorian had been empty 17 years. When the lawyers informed Clara it was hers, her sister Margaret's final joke. Leaving the childhood home, they both vowed to burn down to whichever twin survived the other. The paramedics said Margaret's heart simply stopped while she washed dishes, no warning, no cause. Her body found slumped against a sink full of cold, greasy water. Clara tried not to think about the way Margaret's fingers had looked in the coroner's photos. Pruned and bleached white as peeled almond she moved in during the September rains. The house exhaling damp cellar breath as she dragged boxes of thrift store dishes and faded paperbacks across warped floorboards. By the third night, Clara stopped unpacking. The rooms kept rearranging themselves not dramatically. A hairbrush left on the bedroom dresser would appear in the clawfoot tub. The pantry door she declosed would creak open to reveal shelves, now stocked with rusted soup cans, bearing labels in a language of looping symbols. When she tried to throw them out, she found the trash can filled with wet leaves and what looked like matted black hair. Stress, murmured Dr. Varma during their Thursday telehealth session. Her face pixelated into a mosaic of concerned triangles. Grief hallucinations. Have you been taking the Lowry spam? Clara smiled and shook her head at the laptop camera. Careful not to let the movement reveal the cellar door vibrating in her peripheral vision. She discovered it yesterday behind a moth-eaten tapestry in the dining room. A slanted oak door secured with 3 deadbolts and a heavy padlock. The lock's keyhole wept tarry droplets that smelled like her father's old pipe tobacco that night. The scratching began not mice, not rats, something with too many joints in its fingers, dragging what might have been a wedding ring along the baseboards. Clara lay rigid in Margaret's childhood bed, sweat pooling in the hollow of her throat as the scratches circled her room. When it reached the closet door, she heard the distinct squeak of hinges she'd nailed, shut 3 days prior. The flashlight beam trembled in her hand as it illuminated the closet's interior. Margaret's red velvet party dress still hung where they left it in 1997. But now it bulged with something inside something that made the fabric stretch and ripple like a second skin. The smell of wet earth and copper filled the room. Clara reached for the dress's sleeve. Her fingers closed around warm wrist bones. She woke on the closet floor at dawn, clutching her own left arm hard enough to leave plum-colored bruises. The dress hung empty, but in the dust beneath the hanging clothes, 2 sets of footprints circled where she lain, one bare and child-sized, the other matching her own size 8 sneakers. The photographs started appearing in her darkroom, the one place Clara still found comforting, with its chemical smells and safe red light. She deconverted the butler's pantry, developing snapshots of the house's crumbling moldings and shadowy corners. But the images in the developing trays weren't hers. A girl's face, submerged in a bathtub, dark hair fanning out like ink, a hand emerging from a cellar drain, palm upturned. Worst were the ones that almost looked normal, a family dinner scene with Clara's parents froze in mid-laugh, their eyes scratched out with a fingernail. Margaret's empty chair, occupied by a blurred figure, whose edges bled into the background. Clara started, keeping the knife block on the darkroom counter. The largest blade developed a patina of rust overnight, as though left submerged in salt water. On the morning, she found the teeth in the sugar bowl. Clara finally called someone, not Dr. Varma, not the police. The number on the yellowed business card, tucked behind Margaret's framed nursing school diploma, Paranormal Solutions, LLC, answered a voice like gravel in a tin can. You re in the house now. Aaron T.U. Mr. Havelock arrived at dusk, carrying a leather doctor's bag, and wearing a raincoat that smelled of gasoline. His left eye never quite focused on her face, tracking something over her shoulder as Clara showed him the cellar door. Your sister made the same mistake, he said, running a gloved finger along the weeping keyhole. Thought she could outrun it by leaving. But it grows in the empty spaces, the between moments when you read not quite awake or asleep. He turned his good eye on Clara. You've been sleepwalking. Haven T.U. The floor tilted beneath her. She remembered waking up with dirt under her nails, the shovel leaning against the back porch. She couldn't recall touching. The way her reflection in the hallway mirror sometimes blurred, as though something stood pressed against the other side of the glass havelock, unspooled a tape measure across the cellar door. The numbers along its length, bleeding from inches to symbols, Clara's eyes refused to parse. It wants you to open it, he said, but you mustn't, even when it wears your sister's face, especially then. He left her with a jar of thick oil that made shadows recoil, and a warning to never look at her own reflection in complete darkness. Clara poured the oil along every threshold, the liquid evaporating into smoke that curled into shapes like hooked fingers. For 3 nights, the house held its breath. On the 4th night, Margaret came back. Clara woke to the smell of lemon dish soap and the sound of someone humming Moon River, off-key the way Margaret always had while cleaning. She followed the voice downstairs, the oil lamps casting jumpy shadows that licked at her ankles. Margaret stood at the kitchen sink, her yellow rubber gloves moving in steady circles as she scrubbed a cast-iron skillet. Water slopped over the counter onto the floor. Clara's throat tightened at the familiar cowlick at the crown of her sister's head. The faded Mickey Mouse band-aid on her left thumb from a long-ago cooking accident. You missed a spot, Clara heard herself say, their old joke. Margaret's shoulders shook with silent laughter. When she turned, the water streaming from the faucet turned viscous and dark. Neither of us cleaned thoroughly enough," she said, and Clara's knees buckled at the holes where Margaret's eyes should have been glistening tunnels that seemed to go on forever. "But we will. We'll scour every stain." The thing wearing Margaret's face stepped forward. The kitchen, lights flickering. "Dawn tea, you remember what we did down there?" It whispered as the cellar door began to rattle. "How we played tea party with the thing in the walls. You promised we'd always stay together." Memories ruptured like boils. Clara at age 9, following a sobbing Margaret down to the cellar to play the forgiveness game. Their father's bourbon breath, the way he'd smile when mother took her long naps, the stains on the cellar floor that never came out, no matter how hard they scrubbed. And later, so much later, Clara standing over Margaret's sleeping form with their father's straight razor, whispering you let it happen as the house held its breath, the way Margaret's eyes had flown open right before Lyre. Clara choked as the lights failed. The thing that wasnn't Margaret seized her wrist, its grip burning cold. "You opened the door first." It hissed as the deadbolts began to slide open of their own accord. "You fed it. Now we have to finish the game." The last bolt clicked. In the dark, Clara finally remembered what she'd buried under the rose bushes all those years ago. The taste of blood and soil flooded her mouth as the cellar door swung inward, exhaling the smell of wet earth and a child's delighted laughter. Somewhere beneath the house, a teacup rattled in its saucer. The walls are breathing easier now. Story 8. The ice wept. Dr. Alina Voss first noticed it 3 days into the excavation. Thin, iridescent droplets beading across the glacier's face like mercury sweat. Her breath fogged the inside of her respirator as she knelt. The reinforced knees of her thermal suit sinking into snow that shouldn't have been warm. The anomaly registered at -10°C on her wrist scanner. But when she pulled off her glove, the air above the ice shimmered like desert asphalt. "It's breathing," said Dr. Rajesh Malik. The astrophysicist stood silhouetted against the endless Antarctic white, his shadow warped by the low-hanging sun. His voice crackled through Alina's earpiece, like the whole continent a lung. They'd come to study the neutrino pulses. 3 weeks prior, satellites had detected rhythmic bursts of particle radiation emanating from these coordinates. Patterns too precise to be natural, too vast to be man-made. The Seven Nation team expected meteorite fragments, perhaps a rare uranium deposit. What they found instead made the ice scream. The structure revealed itself incrementally, first as geometric shadows beneath the glacier, visible only on ground-penetrating radar. Then, as pressure ridges jagged lines, intersecting at angles that hurt the eyes, forming shapes the human brain kept trying to unsee. By the 6th day of drilling, the ice gave up its secret. A black spire, smooth as volcanic glass, rising from the frozen waste. It wasn't until nightfall that they saw the writing. Fractal cuneiform, Eleanor whispered. Helmet lamps, carving quicksilver highlights across the spire's surface. Her latex-clad fingers hovered over symbols that branched like lightning strikes, each jagged stroke splitting into smaller replicas until the characters dissolved into microscopic patterns. No, not writing. Mathematics. Quantum states expressed as a migraine spiked behind her left eye. She stumbled back into Clara Dunn, the team's geologist, who caught her with hands still dusty from core samples. You felt it too. Clara's normally ruddy cheeks looked bloodless, like something rifling through your frontal lobe. The spire hummed, not a sound, but a vibration in the marrow, a subsonic frequency that made molars ache. Since sunrise, the ice around the structure had retreated 20 meters, exposing more of the spire's impossible geometry angles, sharper than any crystal. Curves that implied motion even in stillness. Rajesh's spectrometer beeped. Carbon dating puts this thing at 250,000 years old. Predates Homo sapiens by a solid 150 millennia. He laughed, a shrill edge creeping into his voice. Guess we were not the universe's special little project, after all. By midnight, the first aurora appeared. It began as a green smear above the horizon, but quickly metastasized. Luminous tendrils lashed the sky, violet and crimson, and a color none of them could name the visual equivalent of a dissonant chord. Dr. Felix Hayes, the team's biologist, vomited into his mask at the sight. They were not lights, he rasped, wiping his chin. Look between the strands. Eleanor tilted her head. The aurora's underbelly writhed with shadows too dense for mere absence of light negative spaces that squirmed. Her mind kept translating them into almost shapes. A spire here, a coiled tail there, a glimpse of something vast and segmented. The migraine returned, worse this time. She fumbled for her dictation recorder. Day 7. Linguistic analysis suggests the spire's inscriptions function as both language and dimensional map, recurring references to Zulthar, possibly a proper noun, or she hesitated, a verb, to unspool, to ingest, a crunch of snow. Clara stood hugging herself, parka hood frosted with breath ice. The drill team's gone, vanished. Their tent's intact sleeping bags still warm, mugs of cocoa steaming, but no bodies. Just she held up a Ziploc bag containing coarse black sand. This in their boot prints. The aurora pulsed overhead. Shadows dripped like syrup. The nightmares started on day 8. Alina dreamt of ceilings, endless ceilings pressing down. Not stone or ice, but something membranous and alive, veined with bioluminescent capillaries. Things squirmed between the layers pale, jointless limbs that peeled back the ceiling like an eyelid. She woke screaming, her tongue tasting of burnt copper. In the mess tent, Felix stared at his uneaten oatmeal. Dark crescents hung beneath his eyes. "I keep hearing clicks," he said. "In the walls. In my teeth." Rajesh slammed his coffee mug. Brown liquid sloshed, forming a droplet that hung midair for 3 full seconds before falling. "Time dilation," he muttered. "The spire S warping local spacetime. Those neutrino pulses, where in T signals they re-heartbeats." Clara said nothing. She'd been sketching in her field notebook for hours. Pages filled with recursive triangles that grew increasingly frenzied. When Alina touched her shoulder, she jerked like a sleepwalker startled awake. "Don TUC." Clara S. pencil snapped against the paper. It S a temple. The spire. The symbols at S, not a building. It S an altar. A feeding trough. That afternoon, they found the 2nd spire, and the 3rd, and the 12th. Radar scans revealed an array spanning 60 kilometers. Each structure perfectly aligned with celestial bodies no human telescope had ever recorded. The ice continued retreating, exposing basalt foundations etched with more of the fractal script. By nightfall, the camp sat amid a forest of black monoliths, their peaks lost in the aurora cancerous glow. Alina worked feverishly in her lab tent. Translations spilled across whiteboard's equations that described gravity as a byproduct of pain, light as the scream of dying dimensions. The migraine had become permanent, a ice pick through her optic nerve. She didn't notice the whispers until her headphones died. Zulthar Nash, Zulthar Rend, the voice wasn't T in the air. It vibrated in her teeth, her sternum, the fillings in her molars. Flesh is scripture. She fled to the drilling site. The team had bored through 300 meters of ice to reach the main spire, S-base. What awaited below made Alina S. bladder let go. The structure wasn't T hollow. It was inhabited, fossilized in the ice, like insects in amber. Thousands of humanoid figures crowded around the spire S roots. Their proportions wavered too many joints. Faces smeared like wet clay, as if reality itself had rejected their final moments. Some clutched primitive tools. Others bore spiral carvings identical to the Spire S script. All mouths were open in concentric screams. Retinal scans suggest a common ancestor with Homo heidelbergensis. Felix said hollowly. He followed her down, his voice echoing in the ice tunnel. But their DNA, there are base pairs that don't exist. Proteins shaped like Klein bottles. Above them, the aurora flared. Shadows deepened. They worshipped it, Alina realized. Built these spires as offerings or warnings. Felix's flashlight beam trembled. Worship implies benevolence. You don't feed a god you love. A crack echoed through the tunnel. The ice wall beside them splintered, revealing another frozen figure, this one fresh. Dr. Rajesh Malik stared out, his face a rictus of terror, fingers clawing at the ice that had somehow swallowed him whole. His left eye was gone. In its socket writhed a black tendril, fibrous and glistening, terminating in a mouth that mimicked human lips. Threshold approaches, it said, with Rajesh's voice. They ran. Camp lay in ruins. Tents hung in tattered shreds. Their steel frames twisted into spirals. The snow had turned to black glass, crunching like broken teeth underfoot. Clara sat cross-legged before the central spire, parka discarded, bare fingers carving symbols into her frost-beaten thighs. Euclid was wrong. She giggled, blood sizzling where it hit the warm ice. Parallel lines do meet. They kiss. They mate. The aurora had become a vortex, a spiraling maw that stretched from horizon to zenith. Within its depths, vast shapes moved. Alina's mind shattered against their topology. Infinite planes folded through unseen dimensions. Ecosystems thriving in the gaps between atoms. Civilizations born and devoured in the time it took a neuron to fire. Felix grabbed her arm. His nose was bleeding black. The spores in the air, Rajesh's body. A wet crunch cut him off. Clara's head snapped back, jaw unhinging as a translucent tendril erupted from her throat. It bifurcated, plunged into her eye sockets, and pulled. Her skull unfolded like origami, revealing a glistening nest of quills and vibrating membranes. The thing that had been Clara skittered up the spire, clicking in a language of angles. The world flexed. Alina's bones became glass. Her thoughts unraveled, each synaptic connection blooming into a microcosm of screaming faces. She saw the truth. The spires weren't T-structures, but teeth. The aurora wasn't light, but a tongue. Antarctica wasn't a continent, but a palate. And something old beyond stars had pressed its mouth to the Earth's crust, hungry for the morsels inside. Zolthar the endless maw, the first consumer. It had been here, before had gnawed the flesh from ancient continents, left fossilized screams in the Burgess shale, planted the spire seeds to ripen for its next feeding. Humanity's rise was a fungal bloom between a god's teeth. Felix's scream brought her back. He knelt, clutching his abdomen, fingers sunk into a wet hole where his navel should be been. They re-in me, he wept. The spores, they re-singing his spine arched. Ribs burst through skin like antlers. A leaner ran. The generator shack stood miraculously intact. She sealed the door with a welding torch. The act of survival overriding the part of her mind that knew better. Her hands moved mechanically, siphoning diesel fuel, rigging charges from seismic explosives. The walls breathed. Little morsel, it wasn't a voice. It was the creak of tectonic plates, the howl of solar winds, the pop of synapses in a dying brain. ULL sweetened the feast. She plunged the detonator. They found her 2 weeks later, curled in the wreckage of a supply crate, babbling in 12 dead languages. The rescue team reported no spires, no auroras, just pristine ice under a clear sky. Satellite images showed nothing but empty tundra. Alina said nothing when they sedated her, nothing when they debriefed her in a sterile white room, nothing when they showed photos of the Team S bodies frozen solid, perfectly preserved, all faces untouched by fear. She waits now. The migraines never stopped. Sometimes, in the white moments between sleep and waking, she feels the world stretch thin seas. In the corner of her eye, black spires rising from city skylines. Hears the click of chitinous jaws in earthquake rumblings. They think she us mad. Let them. Alina knows the truth. Gods don tea die. They nap. They digest. And Sulthar's hunger was never meant for ancient hominids or Antarctic ice. The spores are in the jet stream now. The stars are blinking out, one by one, and the ice is weeping again. Story 9. The first thing Clara noticed about the old house was the smell of rotting lilacs. She'd forgotten how the valley air turned cloying this time of year. The scent of her mother's overgrown garden mingling with the damp musk of the Blue Ridge foothills. 20 years since she'd last stood on this porch. 20 years since her brother Ben vanished into these woods, wearing nothing but his pajamas. And that stupid plastic sheriff's badge he never took off. The police had found one red sneaker caught in Black Creek's current, waterlogged and studded with leeches. They never found Ben. You shouldn't he be here, said the realtor, jiggling the key in the warped front door. Mrs. Greer's perm smelled like burnt hair beneath the lilacs. Town S got a way of settling into people who stay too long. The door groaned open. Dust motes swam in the late afternoon light, slanting through cracked, stained glass. Clara's childhood home exhaled a wet, organic sigh that raised goosebumps down her arms. She could still see the shadow of where her father's recliner had gouged the hardwood. The water stain on the ceiling, shaped like a screaming face. "We'll take it," Clara said. That night, the whispering started. It came from the walls, first muffled words in a language that slithered. Clara lay rigid in her old bedroom. The same peeling constellations still glowing on the ceiling. The air tasted metallic, like licking a battery, when she pressed her ear to the floral wallpaper. Something pressed back. A cold spot bloomed against her cheek. "Ben," she whispered. The house creaked. Downstairs, the grandfather clock chimed 3 times. It had been broken since the night Ben disappeared. By week 2, Clara stopped sleeping. She'd find clumps of blackened leaves in her coffee mug each morning. Though all the windows stayed locked, the bathroom mirror developed a persistent fog no cleaner could erase. Once, while scrubbing at the glass in a bleach-scented frenzy, she saw movement not behind her, but inside the mirror itself. A small shape darting through the reflected hallway. Plastic sheriff, S-badge glinting. The townspeople watched her. At Hank S. Hardware, old Mr. Fletcher wouldn't he sell her rat traps. "They ain't the problem," he muttered, polishing the same shotgun shell for 10 minutes. Teenagers clustered outside the IGA whispered cradle rocker as she passed. When she confronted Father Pike at St. Ignatius, he crossed himself so violently his rosary beads snapped across the confessional. They made a bargain, he hissed, sweat beading on his jowls. "Your family, all the first sons. You think the valley just gives its bounty." That night, Clara found the photographs. They were crammed in an old Folgers can beneath the porch. Faded Polaroids of boys. Dozens of them, spanning decades. Ben, in his Transformers pajamas. Little Tommy McReady from the 1954 County Fair. Jedediah Colton, 1903, holding a cornhusk doll. All smiling, all with black X's scratched over their eyes. Beneath the stack lay a bone-handled knife, crusted with something dark. Its blade bore the same symbol Clara had been finding everywhere carved into her headboard, etched in the frost on her windshield, swirling in the mold on the shower curtain. 3 overlapping spirals, like a vortex swallowing itself. The woods began calling, not metaphorically, as Clara tossed in sweat-drenched sheets. The trees outside her window hummed, a vibration that made her molars ache. Some nights it resolved into a lullaby, the same one Mom used to sing, about a lady with iron teeth who lived in a well. Other nights it was Ben S. voice, sharp with panic. Clara, they remaking me dance. On the eve of the autumn equinox, she followed the lights. Will-o'-the-wisps bobbed between the pines, casting queasy green light over the trail Ben took that last night. The forest floor squelched beneath her boots, releasing puffs of spores that glittered in the moonlight. The smell worsened spoiled meat and wet mushrooms. When the trees opened into the clearing, Clara vomited into ferns. Stone monoliths formed a rough circle, their surfaces carved with spirals that seemed to writhe in the flickering torchlight. At the center gaped a pit lined with bones, children's bones, some still wearing decayed sneakers or scout troop neckerchiefs. Above them hung effigies made of corn husks and deer sinew, their hollow eyes following Clara as she staggered forward. First daughters finally count. Agatha Weems emerged from the shadows. The town's oldest resident leaning on a thornwood cane. Her left eye was milk blue, the other pitch black. Your daddy promised Ben when the mines dried up. We kept the valley, fed one son per generation, given to the cradle rocker. But you, she grinned, revealing filed teeth. You came back, broke the cycle. The effigies began to rattle. It rose from the pit, slowly, a thing of mulch and marrow, and the desperate prayers of hungry people, its limbs elongated like taffy, joints popping in reverse. Where a face should be beyond a hollow, ringed with jagged stone teeth, spinning like a grindstone. The cradle rocker's lullaby vibrated from its core, shaking Clara's bones. Hush, little babe. Don't say a word. Agatha's cane cracked across Clara's knees. As she fell, the thing's shadow engulfed her. Cold deeper than winter poured down her throat. Memories not her own flickered dad, leading Ben into the woods by hand. Mom stitching spiral patterns into all their clothes. Clara herself, age 8, pushing her brother out his bedroom window as he sleepwalked toward the singing. Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird. The last thing she saw before the spinning teeth were the photographs tumbling from the cradle rocker. Maw. New editions glistened with fresh ink. Clara at the hardware store. Clara scrubbing the mirror. Clara sleeping. Black X's already bleeding across her eyes. And if that mockingbird Dante sing, they found the Folgers can 2 weeks later. New Polaroids on top showed Clara in her childhood bed. Eyes zed out, smiling. Beneath it lay every missing child from the past century. All grinning, all holding hands. At the bottom was Ben's other sneaker, still dripping. Story 10. The keepers of Lowry Point. The storm severed the causeway at 3:17 p.m. Mara watched it happen through the salt-crusted kitchen window of the Lowry Point lighthouse, her knuckles whitening around the chipped mug of gone-cold coffee. A concrete chunk the size of a minivan slid into the thrashing Atlantic as casually as a sugar cube dissolving in tea by the time the waves finished chewing through the narrow land bridge. There was nothing left but frothing water and the distant smear of the Maine coastline. Just her now, just the lighthouse, just whatever kept scratching at the basement door. They warned her about the isolation. The Maritime Historical Society had been desperate enough to hire a 24-year-old freelance cartographer to update the coastal maps. Nobody else would take the 2-week posting at the loneliest light north of Portland. Mara had laughed at the caretaker Shack vintage rotary phone, the moth-eaten wool blankets, the way every surface tasted like decades of trapped salt. She needed the money, needed the silence too. If she were honest, the kind of quiet where maybe she could stop hearing her little brother's bicycle skid across wet asphalt. Stop seeing the way her mother's face had folded in on itself when the surgeon said paralyzed from the neck down. The first night, Mara dreamt of drowning, not the dramatic gasping kind, but the slow descent, fingertips brushing cold sand as her hair fanned out like ink in the black water. She woke with a gasp to find her pillow damp and reeking of kelp. Pipes must be leaking. She told the cracked bathroom mirror next morning, scrubbing briny residue from her cheeks. The reflection staring back, didn't he look convinced? Things got worse after the storm. Day 4. She found her favorite drafting pencil snapped in half on the observation deck, its graphite core crushed to black dust. Ravens watched from the rusted weather vane, heads cocked. Day 6. The generator died. Mara spent hours hunched over the diesel engine. Grease smeared across her windbreaker before realizing the fuel line had been cleanly severed, not worn, not chewed, but cut. That night, something dripped in the dark, slow, viscous plops that echoed up the spiral staircase. She clutched her father's old Swiss Army knife until dawn, throat raw from swallowed screams. Day 8. The tides changed. Mara noticed it while sketching the cove's erosion patterns, the way the water now withdrew like a held breath, exposing black rocks, glistening with mussels and sea stars. It left behind deep, zigzagging fissures in the sand that looked disturbingly like footprints. At low tide, the stench of decay wafted from the beach, not the clean rot of stranded jellyfish, but the meaty putrescence of something that had gestated in dark places. She started wearing the lighthouse key on a string around her neck. After finding the front door ajar 3 mornings in a row, its hinges weeping rust-colored liquid. The Caretaker S. Journal, 1947 edition. Brittle pages filled with cramped script. Mentioned nothing about previous keepers going mad, but Mara found disturbing gaps whole weeks where entries devolved into manic sketches of elongated figures wading through tide pools, their limbs jointed all wrong. On day 11, the voices began. Not voices, exactly more like the memory of voices, muffled and warped, as if heard through seawater. They came at twilight, when the dying sun painted the Tower S interior, the color of blood, diluted in milk. Mara would be cooking canned soup on the propane stove, or brushing her teeth with bottled water, when the air would suddenly thicken. A cold draft would lick the back of her neck, and beneath the wind's endless moaning, she'd catch syllables that almost formed words. Marrow cut the ropes hungry. Now she took to sleeping with the hurricane lamp burning, its flickering light casting leviathan shadows on the tower walls. The scratching at the basement door intensified long, deliberate rasps that made her teeth ache. Whatever was down there, and Mara was starting to doubt it was rats, had begun testing the locks. The worst moment came when she mistook her reflection in a rain-streaked window for someone else, a gaunt woman with seaweed hair and eyes like drowned oysters, pressed palms against the glass, mouth stretched in a soundless scream. Mara shattered the window with a fire extinguisher before realizing the face had been her own. By day 13, the lighthouse itself seemed to turn against her. The spiral staircase, iron steps, grew slippery, with a substance too thick to be condensation. The walls oozed briny black liquid that ate through her maps like acid when she tried radioing for help. The receiver spat back garbled static that somehow hurt a nails-on chalkboard screech, layered with wet, crunching noises. That night, Mara made 3 discoveries. 1. The basement key, kept on a hook by the generator, was missing. 2. The tides hadn't just changed, they stopped. The sea now hung perpetually at half-mast, exposing a jagged reef where the cove should have been. 3. She wasn't alone. She saw them at moonrise shapes emerging from the stagnant water, tall and stooped. Their silhouettes suggested fishermen in oilskins, but the way they moved joints bending backward, heads lolling like overripe fruit, they shuffled up the beach in that terrible half-light, leaving trails of glistening sludge. Mara counted 6 before the clouds swallowed the moon. The basement door began to rattle. No, Mara whispered, pressing her back against the shuddering wood. The key around her neck felt suddenly heavy, teeth biting into her sternum. No, 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 something scratched the door, other side long. slow drags of claw on oak. A wet chuckle bubbled through the keyhole. The smell hit her then. Low-tide decay, yes, but underneath it copper, salt. Her brother's hospital antiseptic scent. She fled upstairs, knees barking against iron steps. The observation deck offered no sanctuary, the ravens were gone. And the beacon fractured lens, cast fractured light over the beach. They were closer now, close enough to see their faces, wherein faces at all. But colonies of mussels and barnacles arranged into something almost human. One turned its encrusted head toward the lighthouse. Mara didn't realize she was screaming until her throat burned. The journal entry she found later explained everything, though she wished it hadn't. Tucked between grocery lists and tide charts, written in her own handwriting. They coming up through the caves. The previous keepers tried to seal them in concrete over the old well. Steel doors, prayers scratched into the walls. But the hungry things learned to wear our faces, learned to whisper with our tongues. You can hear them in the walls sometimes, practicing. Don T, trust the reflections. Don T, answer the voices. Don T, the page ended in a jagged tear. Mara stared at her trembling hands, at the half-moon cuts her nails had left in her palms. How many pages were missing? How many days? When the lights finally died on day 14, Mara did something desperate. She took the basement key, still warm from her skin, and descended. The smell was worse here, rotting fish, and something sweetly floral, like funeral lilies. Her flashlight beam quivered over rusted tools, collapsed shelving. A child's waterlogged sneaker. Since when did the society allow keepers with families? The scratching had stopped. The silence was worse. She found the second journal in a corroded lockbox beneath the stairs. Its pages were damp, ink bleeding into Rorschach blots. But one entry remained legible. They in the walls now. Jenny opened the door last night, said she heard our son crying. It wasn't T. Michael. It wore his face, like a loose glove, skin bubbling, where the salt water leaked through. IV barred the seaward entrance, but the concrete crumbling. They coming. They Mara breath hitched. The final word had been scribbled over dozens of times, the pen nearly tearing through the paper. Hungry, 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 hungry. A cold hand closed around her ankle. She didn't scream, didn't drop the flashlight, just stood frozen as the thing crawled from beneath the stairs. A grotesque parody of human form. Its barnacle-encrusted limbs moving with insectile precision. The face, oh God, the face was hers, but stretched and waterlogged, kelp hair writhing like Medusa-esque snakes. It smiled with blackened teeth. Mara, It gurgled, salt water streaming from its nostrils. We've been waiting. She ran. Of course she ran. Up the stairs, through the kitchen, out into the storm-lashed night. The beach swarmed with them, now a dozen, 20, their hunched forms converging on the lighthouse. The sea roared approval. They didn't chase her. Not exactly. They simply appeared where she ran, rotting hands brushing her sleeves, their seaweed stench filling her nostrils. Mara's lungs burned. The key around her neck thrummed like a live wire. When she reached the cliff's edge, the thing wearing her face was already there. Don T, you recognize us? It asked, head tilting too far. Behind it, the stagnant sea began to churn. We re what you let drown. And then Mara understood. The dreams, the guilt, the way her maps always seemed to chart deeper waters. She thought of her brother's ventilator whoosh, her mother's hollow eyes, the endless, gnawing want that had driven her to this cursed rock. The first hand emerged from the wave's skeletal, shimmering with bioluminescent algae. Then another, and another. Mara stepped back. The things on the beach moaned, a sound like foghorns echoing through a drowned cathedral. Hungry, they sighed. The key burned against her chest. She jumped, or perhaps they pulled her. The cold stole her breath before the water did. Down she plunged, past the false reef, into a cavern where the skeletons of ships nested like broken teeth. The things swarmed around her, not attacking, not saving, simply escorting. Their true forms defied the light, all writhing tentacles and razor-edged shells. At the cavern's heart lay the source of the smell, a fleshy, pulsating mound studded with, no. Mara's hand flew to her mouth. Human faces bulged from the biomass, their features distorted by the membrane, stretched tight across them. She recognized the caretaker from the journal photos, a man in a 1940s naval uniform, a girl no older than 8, and there, newly formed, a face still soft at the edges, her own. The last of her air escaped in silvery bubbles. She didn't fight, as cold fingers closed around her wrists. Didn't scream as the membrane enveloped her. Up on the cliff, the lighthouse beacon flared, once a final, desperate cry, before the tower crumbled into the sea. By morning, even the rocks had vanished beneath the hungry waves. The Maritime Historical Society declared Lowry Point lost to coastal erosion. Sailors still whisper about strange lights under the moonless waves, and fishermen avoid the area where their nets sometimes dredge up sodden pages filled with familiar handwriting. As for Mara, you might glimpse her during summer storms, when the sea goes preternaturally calm. Look for a figure standing waist-deep in the swells, head tilted as if listening to distant voices. Don T call out. Don T shine your light. And if you ever find a rusted key washed ashore, teeth stained with seawater, and something darker, throw it back. They re still hungry. Story 11. The ice sang. Dr. Alina Voss heard it first through 3 layers of thermal insulation. A low, arrhythmic thrumming in the glacier beneath Halley 6 research station. She pressed her parka S hood tighter around her ears, as if that might silence the sound vibrating up through the Antarctic shelf. It didn't. By midnight, the entire meteorological team heard it. A discordant hum resonating in their molars, their sternums, the fillings in Dr. Nguyen. S left molar. Seismic activity, said Garrison Cole, their geologist, staring at the jagged lines spiking across his monitors. Except the readings Don T match any tectonic patterns. It is localized, directly under us. They found the shaft 12 hours later, buried beneath a century of compacted snow. The drill bit broke through into a hollow space, and when Cole lowered the borehole camera, its infrared lens revealed smooth, obsidian walls descending into perfect blackness. Too smooth, too straight. That S not a crevasse, whispered Mara Lim, the Team S biologist. Her breath crystallized in the air. It is a shaft, manufactured. The word hung there, blasphemous. They waited 3 days for approval from the British Antarctic Survey. None came. Satellite communications had gone silent the moment they transmitted the borehole images, replaced by a hissing white noise that made a leaner S sinuses ache. By then, the Ice S song had become a teeth-rattling drone, and frost crystallized in fractal patterns across the station S windows patterns that looked unsettlingly like recursive mathematical formulae. They descended at dawn. The harness creaked as Alina rappelled into the shaft, her headlamp carving a frail circle in the darkness. 40 meters down, her boots touched floor. The air here was wrong thick and briny, smelling of deep ocean trenches, and something sharper, metallic. Her light glanced off walls that absorbed, then smothered the beam, as though the black stone drank photons. No tool marks, Cole said, running a gloved hand along the wall. His voice sounded muffled, swallowed. No seams, like it was poured in place. Mara S. headlamp trembled as she aimed it down the tunnel branching from the chamber. Their S writing. They clustered around the inscriptions. Not writing, Alina realized. Not quite. The symbols carved into the walls resembled cuneiform. If viewed through a kaleidoscope, angles, intersecting at impossible dimensions. Hieroglyphs that squirmed faintly when stared at peripherally. She touched one, then jerked her hand back. The stone was warm. It as a map, Cole breathed. Alina didn't he ask how he knew. The longer she stared, the more the symbols imparted not meaning, but direction, a route, a compulsion. They followed the tunnel. The chamber they found could not exist. Alina's rational mind scrabbled for purchase as her headlamp revealed vast, curved walls arching hundreds of meters overhead, a space far larger than the ice shelf above should permit. The air hummed now, a subsonic thrumming that vibrated in their capillaries, and there, at the center, suspended in a column of light, refracted through some unseen aperture, floated it. It as a machine, Mara said. But even she didn't believe it. The structure, if structure it, was resembled a Klein bottle, crafted by a deranged god. Looping silver filaments, intersecting at angles that hurt to perceive, pulsing with a light that cast no shadows. It hung motionless. Yet Alina felt the sickening lurch of something turning, rotating in directions beyond 3 dimensions. Cole approached first. When his glove brushed a filament, the chamber shivered. Light exploded. Alina screamed as visions detonated behind her eyes, not images, but knowings. A trillion galaxies spinning like cogs. Black stars older than time, singing in ultraviolet. Civilizations rising and falling in the space between breaths, and beneath it all, a pattern. Civilizations snuffed out not by malice, but by the universe's idle turning. A cosmic harvest. "Oh God," Mara whimpered. She was clawing at her face, blood welling beneath her nails. "It is in me. It is in me, Cole," wasn't he speaking? Cole was chanting in a guttural tongue. His eyes rolled back to wet marbles as he traced the air in geometries that bled light. Alina ran. The ice wept as she fled the tunnel. Not metaphorically translucent droplets oozed from the shaft walls, coalescing into shapes that mirrored the chamber's machine. Her radio crackled with voices that weren't human, howling through octaves no throat could produce. She found the research station empty. No, not empty. Changed. The walls bulged inward, as if pressed by gigantic hands. Angles, now subtly non-Euclidean. Frost formulae spiraled across every surface, solving themselves into quantum equations that dissolved when stared at. In the mess hall, Alina found Dr. Nguyen's parka, and inside it, a slurry of semi-frozen blood and jagged bone shards, as though his skeleton had detonated. The satellite array was still hissing. Alina played back the last transmitted message, her frostbitten fingers slipping on the keys. A voice emerged, or a facsimile of one, pieced together from snippets of the team S. own recordings. Cycle completes in 7.3 rotations. Mara S. laugh. Spliced with Cole S. scream. Harvesters arrive with the next axial tilt, a wet crunching. Like vertebrae being separated, you will be spared Nguyen S. voice now, but warped, pleading. You will be spared the transmission cut. Outside, the aurora australis churned in colors Aliner couldn't name. She stared at the weather station S monitors, now showing a single line of text in jagged, self-assembling pixels. Orbital deviation 0.0003%. Estimated recalibration 7,293 hours, she understood. The machine wasn't a warning. It was a tombstone, a marker left by whatever had been here before. 100 million years ago, when Antarctica was green, and now, having been awakened, it was calling the harvesters back. Aliner stumbled to the medical bay. The morphine syringe trembled in her hand. She hesitated, then pressed the needle not into her arm, but into her eyeball, hoping to rupture the optic nerve. It didn't help. The visions persisted, because they weren't in her head. They were in the sky. They let her live. She isn't sure why. Aliner dictates this from a concrete cell in Port Lockroy, where the British government quarantines the mad and the inconvenient. The attendants wear sealed suits now. They've seen the frost patterns coiling up the walls. Sometimes, in the perpetual Antarctic day, she glimpses them shapes moving behind the auroras. So vast their silhouettes curve with the horizon. The doctors say it S hallucination, but she knows the truth. The harvesters are patient. They wait for Earth to tilt just so, for the machine S song to crescendo, and then the universe will take no notice. Aliner S daughter turned 8 last week. They showed her a photo through the quarantine glass. The girl was drawing spirals in crayon, over and over, until the paper tore. It S the noise Aliner hates most, not the Ice S song, still humming in her dreams, not the attendants' muffled screams as the frost reaches them. It S the silence from the stars, the absolute, unbroken indifference, orbital deviation, 0.0002% estimated recalibration, 6,591 hours, she counts everyone.